Hello, everyone. So I'm joined by Tony Meehan, and Tony and I have been talking about his work. He's just finished his 8 years of research into an exploration of PRUs, which are pupil referral units. And Tony, can we get straight in, because I'm zooming you from Hong Kong, private international school. So PRU is something I'm familiar with, and probably a few of the listeners are, but can you explain what the PRU is and how it fits into the landscape of the UK educational state system, please?
Certainly. A PRU stands for Pupil Referral Unit, and it's where young people who are effectively excluded from schools end up. They were introduced following the 1993 Education Act, and they are off-site units. Once a young person is excluded from school, more than likely this is where they will end up. And the other thing I need to say about PRUs is this: on paper, they are not just for excluded pupils. There are a range of issues why a young person might attend a PRU.
Right.
Like there might be illness. One of the issues is actually they might be being bullied, so they will go to a PRU. My
Right.
experience, however, is that PRUs are almost always for pupils excluded from mainstream schools. Does that help?
Now, one of the things that we talked about, so just to expand a little bit more on the landscape, as
Yeah.
I left the UK almost 20 years ago now, and I was working at a comprehensive school in Southeast London, and that school has been academised. So could you talk to me about the academisation process of the comprehensive school systems, the shifting landscape, and connect it to the shifting UK political landscape? Part of our earlier conversation was about the impact of Brexit.
It's a really, really complex situation at the moment. I think the best way to describe it is we have now a very fractured education system. Mainstream schools, most secondary schools now are academies. So this is added to this sense of a fractured nature of the education system. I don't have the figures for whether it's the numbers going are being excluded from academies are higher than local authority maintained schools. But many of the academies are taking an approach to punishment, shall we say, which is quite extreme, I would argue. The expression zero tolerance runs through the policies of many of them, not all. I have to be clear about this, not all. But I think what it leads to is a situation where school system, as I said earlier on, is fractured. There is a sense of competition between them. So I would argue that the academies are run on a business model. They have to stay financially viable. Many of them have inflated salaries for their CEOs, and I mean even the name CEO, to my mind, just doesn't make sense. It's an education establishment, and we definitely have moved towards a business model. Now, having a business model means that, what are we talking about here? Like a young person who just doesn't fit in here. Well, we can shift them off, ship them off. But for me, my experience was running and maintain a local authority maintained pupil referral unit, and at some stage 2014 or 15, I think it was, being taken over and becoming part of a multi-academy trust, and things for me changed then. I'll stop now and let you pull that apart, John?
Well, before we get purely into your work in the PRU,
Yeah.
can you help for me explain the counter argument? Why did the UK government decide to pursue the policy of academies, and what did it replace? There must have been a reason, right?
It's an interesting one because academies were there prior to this Conservative government. I think it was the last Labour government who introduced academies on a limited scale. And once Michael Gove came in as Education Secretary, he expanded that completely. And really, it was an attempt to move schools onto a neoliberal platform. And that's my point about schools needing to show value for money. The idea of competition, league tables were brought in. I think, again, I'm not sure when, but league tables, the whole idea of schools competing for pupils is what happened, certainly accelerated under the Gove government, Gove Education Secretary. So what you have then is a lot of people wanting to buy into the idea of academies, but with the idea that you could reduce education to its bare minimum. What do we need to get them to cross this line? And I remember the idea, and this was in mainstream school, the idea of education became, how do we get them across what was called at the time the CD borderline?
That's
So
very familiar.
yeah. So this became the be all and end all of education. And it was expected because there were targets to be set. Schools were under pressure to perform and get over the CD borderline. And if they were local authority maintained, if they didn't reach a certain standard, they could be forced into academisation. So you have then this ongoing pressure from a range of sources, both from the government for all schools to be academies. Schools could choose willingly to become academies, or they could be forced to become academies.
Mm-hmm.
And this then has led to a situation of, where many local authorities have maintained schools within their area. There hasn't been a drive for academisation, but the pressure from central government is for all schools to be academies. And the latest is that this government has a green paper out that says all schools by 2030 will become academies. That, of course, has to be seen how that will pan out.
Mm-hmm. So I remember this is, as I said, the best part of 20 years ago, and I was part of a boot camp. We took the CD
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
borderline students away, and
Yeah.
part of the enrichment was a weekend in the youth hostel. They did get to go ice skating. It was quite nice, but they loved being away and outside of London as well, outside of the postcode battle zones that are
Yeah.
drawn, and we were just
Yeah.
crunching through the coursework to try and get the C's for the and to try to cook the books and get up the performance
Yeah.
table. And would this be a fair characterization of the reason why would the government would like academies? Because it alleviates the pressure on funding all of the schools themselves, because private companies can come in and what raise academic standards, like is that and the reason they want that is because they want a more competitive, sharper edged economy. Okay, so those are the arguments for that. And the people in can you because it's so long ago that I worked in this, and I wondered if you could just explain a bit more about what they replaced. Can you talk about the comprehensive school system and what that when that came in and what that meant for many peoples who were included within that?
You know, it's been a gradual process since over the last 14 years, but it has accelerated the academisation process. It replaced a system of local authority maintained schools. All schools, other than private schools, were local authority maintained. And, you know, there were some local authorities were struggling. There's no doubt about that. But many were not struggling, but still had the spectre, shall we say, of academisation hanging over them. The pressure to improve and to, you know, get a certain level of results has contributed to, like we talked earlier on, John, about, you know, quantitative. Oh, have I got that right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
But
just about,
anyway, the
yeah.
quantitative measurements. That's what, you know, academies really appreciate.
Mm.
You've got several measures, GCSEs, 1s to 9s. You've got Ofsted, you know, outstanding, satisfactory and requires improvement, and good, sorry, outstanding, good, and satisfactory and requires improvement. These are easy measures for parents to look at. And this is where the schools have really, the academies have really thrived. They've looked at this and said, okay, what do we need to get these kids over the borderline, the CD threshold? It's 1 to 9, 4/5 now. You know, they've changed the GCSE numberings. So it's not A to G or anymore, it's 1
Right,
to 9 or
right.
9 to 1, 9 top, 1 bottom. So schools were easy, where there wasn't such a high performance, and usually in deprived areas. They were the ones who would be always under the greatest pressure because their scores were not as high as they would be in, say, middle class areas.
Mm.
And I don't know the spread of how many are middle class areas are local authority maintained and how many are remain in deprived areas. But those deprived schools were the ones where things would be more difficult. So, I mean, you have a landscape now of schools, and don't forget, in among all those are free schools as well. And this is just where anybody can rock up and say, you know, I've got an idea for a school, you know, put forward a proposal to the Department for Education, and you know, as long as everything was above board, you could just set up a school down the road.
Okay.
So again, you have this sort of sense of a system where competition is alive and well and the driver for whether a school would survive. And for a school to be taken over, and I remember this happened to me in my PRU when we were taken over by a multi-academy trust. And we had an Ofsted just prior to be taking over, being taken over. And we got good. And I remember my CEO saying, it would have been better if we had got satisfactory or below, requires improvement. Why? Because that would have meant more money. So, but because we were good, we were described as a converter academy, like we chose to become part of this multi-academy trust. Now, I had no say in that because this was at a local authority level. School was run by the local authority. I was merely the head of the school within that local authority. Does that make sense, John? Sorry, it feels as if I'm really confusing things here.
No, no, not at all. I mean, this is complex stuff, but what you seem to be describing is a very sort of mechanized, um, quantitative process. Yeah, and at no point have we mentioned the individuals. And I just wondered if we could maybe talk about what's all this at the cost of? Endless competition, those who are capable of performing under these arbitrary examinations advance on into universities and into the economy, but that's not for everyone. So, and even then, those who are able to perform under those arbitrary conditions, what's it all at the expense of? So another way of saying that would be, what do you really think is the purpose of education? What should a student be getting, a child be getting as they go through their secondary educational experience?
Well, I think one of the things we talked about earlier on, I think, is the education system as a whole, what it looks like, and why PRUs are on the margins of the education system over there. Hopefully, nobody will pay too much attention to them.
Okay.
I said also that this education system will not function without them. So they're pushed over there, and hopefully nobody will pay too much attention. Every now and then people do, because they look, oh, exclusions are on the rise, and they look at the data to say, okay, these are the same pupils who are going to end up in prison, what they call the PRU to prison pipeline.
Mm.
So this is at the expense of a growing number of pupils who cannot cope with the sort of quite rigid, inflexible approaches to education, which means we just need to get them over this threshold. And if a pupil is not getting over this threshold, looks like they're not getting over this threshold, well, then they may be forced into, maybe ultimately forced out. Not all, but if they're not conforming in the way that education system is being designed, then there is what, I can't remember who it was, but somebody might calls them unmarketable pupils.
Mm.
They become prey to the system, and but ultimately edged out. And I've seen a lot of this, pupils arriving at my PRU where they're looking and the parents are going to say, what is this place? My child is not staying here. And then we try to unpack what it is, what are the reasons for them being here? How did they arrive here? And this is not to say all young people are angels. No, of course not. But many schools are taking the view, pushed him out, or they're also making it, prohibitive for them to even apply to that school because its reputation is so fixed and rigid. Now, I have to stress that these are my views, okay? The view from a PRU, I would call it.
Yeah.
And there are a growing number of pupils being excluded and spat out from the system. So there was some joy. I remember thinking the statistics showed that exclusions dropped through COVID. Okay, and I remember thinking, yeah, but they'll rise again once COVID is done and dusted. And guess what? That has happened. So the point about PRUs and where they sit, I want to make is this: that we are in fact supporting a broken system.
Right.
And pupils being placed in these schools is not helpful in the long run to the health, well-being, and welfare of these pupils, unless they can get themselves back into mainstream system, fully able to participate. But that's one of the issues that cannot happen. Reintegration is very, very difficult. Some areas of the country, it is working well. PRUs are able to work well with the local mainstream schools, and pupils get back into them. However, and this has been acknowledged by report after report after report. The most recent was the Timpson report. That was 2019. But many reports prior to that has shown that these kids are not getting back into, are not being reintegrated, that the systems that they have for reintegration, in fact, often prohibit reintegration because they operate in such a manner to say, no, we can't have any more pupils here. Now, that should not be allowed to happen. So my argument is the PRUs could work more effectively if there was a regular and easy route back into the mainstream school. But my research, as I mentioned earlier on, showed that many pupils, and this is acknowledged by Timpson report, stay for their whole time in secondary school.
Well, I think I involuntarily winced when you mentioned the impact of COVID and that false impression that things were getting better, because it was a really tough experience for everyone here in Hong Kong, around the world, to keep people away from the social emotional impact of that is vast, and then that's impacting on people who are already at the vulnerable edges. So it must have been devastating. What I would like to ask is that I wondered if you could maybe bring a few of these cases to life, and bring into the flesh some of the people that you interviewed, because you were mentioning about your doctoral interview, that the panel came across some interviews that you'd recorded and they found that those were illuminating. Could you tell us about those moments, please?
Yeah. Again, it was a small study. The difficult part was getting parents to participate. And that's why I had to do them face to face, because we were dealing with parents of vulnerable pupils, and some of the parents arguably vulnerable themselves. But the most striking of the interviews I had was with a parent whose English was not very good and who had 4 children in a school at one time. And what emerged was his children were clearly giving the school some difficulties and challenges, shall we say.
Yeah.
Now, what happened then was that the head teacher called the dad in and told the dad, I am arranging for 3 of your children to go to another school or other schools. So what he effectively did was move 2 of the pupils, 2 of the children to 2 other schools, and 1 to the local pupil referral unit. And I had to really work hard to ensure that I was hearing the full story here because of the dad's struggles with English. So it was a lot of probing, asking questions to make sure I had heard what I had just heard, and I was clear what he was. Because what was interesting, as the conversation went on, the dad became more fluent, he became more confident. And I said to him, so this teacher, this school moved all 3 of your children out,
with no
but they weren't excluded. Say again?
With no consultation.
No consultation with anybody. Just told the dad this is what's happening. Now, this goes on from time to time, and it's called off-rolling. Because when you cannot exclude a person for the benefit of the school necessarily, or off-roll for the benefit of the school. Off-rolling is where there's an agreement between managed move. Sorry, I got confused there. Hopefully edit this out. But sorry. head teacher said he was arranging a managed move to two different schools and the pupil referral unit for 3 of his children, leaving just 1 in the school. This meant then that the dad was faced with a prospect of 3 of his children simply being dispersed to 2 other schools and a PRU. Only 1 remaining in the school.
Right.
And again, as I said, I had to probe carefully to make sure I had heard correctly. Because managed move is an agreement. He would have to have signed the documentation to say, agree this. I would argue, and I have argued in my research, that this was a clear case of off-rolling, which is illegal, where you do a managed move for the benefit of the school, not for the pupils.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this situation then where this led me to explore the whole concept of what an off-rolling is. An off-rolling, has been acknowledged by Ofsted as something that concerns them. But schools can do this, and it's very, very, very hard to detect. They can if they have conversations with the parents and the parents led to believe it's in their child's best interest for a managed move, without really any consultation with anybody, without support. And often the argument is, well, a managed move would be better than an exclusion. Now, don't forget, exclusion leaves you open to scrutiny by governors and appeals. A managed move is, oh, no, we're all agreed, sign the paper, off you go.
Well, Tony, I think that we'll keep this in unedited, because I think what it shows is that even a doctoral candidate who's worked in this thing can get mixed up with the terminology. What an absolute nightmare for the second language parent who's being blown about by the forces of the bureaucracy and has no idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
do you know what? Yeah.
What did that, so at that point, is that that's becomes to you more than just a research inquiry point for a thesis? Is that somewhere where you would then go and advocate in front of the local authority, or what happens when you've recognized that this is the case?
Well, obviously, there's nothing I could have done about that. But it has led me to, I get now called into schools where a child is on the verge of exclusion. And I will often make sure that the parents have been consulted and are clear and are fully understanding of what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because what brought about my thesis was having parents arrive at my school really confused about what is this place?
Right.
How long is my child staying here? When are you sending my child back to mainstream? And me having to say, no, when your child goes back to mainstream really depends upon a lot of factors. Good behavior here. I had to write reports to make this child is ready for a mainstream school. But I can tell you a strange story about that as well, because we had a pupil who behaved extremely well in the PRU, who we arranged to go back to a mainstream school, all accepted, done, dusted. Then the head contacted me that pupils had come up to him and say, no, he's known out on the streets as a gang member, and so we're rescinding the position. Now, that child did everything they could to earn that place back into mainstream with us. But that external factor was brought into the mix, and we had no control over that.
Right.
That was simply no. Now, as I said, in some local authorities, it works. And I do believe where I did my research, it has improved. There is a sense of fairness has had to come into the mix. But in many places, and one area I cannot remember where it was in my research, but there is a report that says it's a one-way ticket. There is no reintegration in certain areas of the country. So the idea is that you go to a pupil referral unit and that's it. And this is something through my literature review was revealed that over time, this has been said, for some pupils, they stay in the PRU throughout their whole time in education, in compulsory education. There is no prospect of them moving into a mainstream school again. But an awful lot of the parents came to me thinking, oh, no, they're only here for a few, until for a few till we get a good report and behavior improves, and then they're going back to their existing mainstream school. And I have to say, no. And the head of the PRU I interviewed for this talked about a parent who did this, thinking, well, no, he's going back. He's only here for a few months, and then once his behavior improves, he's going back. And the head had to show them the letter. Now, bear in mind, they have to sign the documentation, had to show them the letter they had signed to show that this is a permanent move away from this school. They're not coming back.
Right.
That to me was where you begin, and I experienced this as well, my own, a while as head of a PRU. My issue around PRUs, as I said to you, I keep saying is this: they support the functioning of the whole education system, but it's a forgotten part of the education system. It's over there. And the research from way back talks about them being on the periphery of the education system. And that's what it felt like being there. Really, people did not want to engage with us until they were excluding someone. That's when they would engage with us. When the other way back was through what we call a fair access protocol. And for a time that worked. I remember there was one of the people in the local authority got it working, got the heads together. You're having this person, it's your turn to have it. But think about that. It's your turn. Your turn to have someone bad. It's your turn. It's your turn. That fell away and ultimately then became a job of bartering, me ringing head teachers, trying to convince them, look, I've got someone here. I desperately need to move them on, blah, blah, blah. Now, once it comes to year 11, or sorry, year 10 and year 11, there was no chance of moving them back because it would impact on exam results.
Right. So what?
Sorry, is this too negative here?
No, it's the reality of it. But I'm just trying to get a clearer sense, maybe of, let's say, someone is removed from a school and comes to you, and it's one of the parents who believes it might be a short-term deal,
Yeah.
but they've signed this paper.
Yeah.
So for them, what does the PRU do for them? Does it protects them from themselves? It protects them from family or from society? Do they have the chance to have really enriching lives? Can you tell me some really success stories of people who've really benefited from working within the PRU?
Yeah, I mean, I had a great bunch of staff. I was surrounded by incredibly strong people. And we were not there simply to make up the numbers with the pupils or pat them on the head. Lessons went on. We had a very, very strong commitment and good teachers in the PRU and many success stories. I mean, some of whom went on to university, some of whom went on to, and I'm still in contact with them. You know what I mean? They will you know, oh, Tony, man, it's lovely to see you, thank you for all of this. And I said, there was no thank you. They just got on with it. And I had one young person who was very, very strong-minded young person, very small in stature. And I never forget, he said, man, this is like a private school. I just talk to these teachers and they just so willing to help me, because we were always willing to help those individuals who stepped forward and says, no, I want to do X, I need to do this. And always went the extra mile when we could find, when a young person sought to engage with us so thoroughly and wasn't bothered or distracted by a lot of the challenging behavior we experienced. So once you have those, I'll tell you a great story. We had a pupil, I'll call her Jenny.
Yep.
And we had a uniform at my school because pupils asked for it. They asked for it because they wanted to be seen to be going to a school like everybody else.
Mm.
So they designed the uniform. Fine. So that was one of the things we were proud of, because they chose it, they designed it. But every now and then we had to have a little bit of a crackdown, the way a mainstream would do, but not as in any way, shape as strict or rigid. So if someone come in without their top on, we'd lend them one.
Yeah.
So we put them in detention. But Jenny came down one day with Jenny arrived at school one day just when we were making an issue of uniform. Jenny arrived and she was blue hair, blue face, blue. Every aspect of Jenny was blue, hands, face, everything. It's amazing. And a member of staff came to me. I was in my office, said, we've got a problem. I said, oh, what's
Got a
going on?
Smurf.
Well, no, but it was. She said, what's the issue? She said, oh, you need to come down and see for yourself. So I came out intrigued, came down. There was Jenny in all her glory. She was a work of art. I just said, let her in. We're not sending home or anything like that. I'm not putting a uniform. She just looks amazing. So Jenny came in, and what was powerful, not one other pupil kicked off about it, because they knew this was Jenny.
Right.
Now, Jenny did this twice. She did it another time. She became orange later on. We got Jenny into a mainstream school. And Jenny asked to come back because she couldn't cope with the fact that they couldn't cope with her.
Oh, wow.
And she came back to us, welcome. And she went on to university. I've lost touch with her for a while, but she went on to university. She did amazing things. So what I'm
Super.
saying is, within the PRU, we could do fantastic things in an environment. And I'll tell you why we could, because staff were so strong, not in demanding or we were counterintuitive in the way we approached behavior.
Yeah.
So we had kids calling us all sorts of things.
Mm.
And we used humor to de-escalate the situation. So someone might call me an F and this, that, and the other, and I would turn around and say, that's the second nicest thing someone has said to me today. And you're gone. You're just wiping out any of effect. So that's sort of, we had very little violence with a lot of latent aggression, though.
Okay.
But we distinguished the two. So yeah, okay. Yeah, I hear you now. I can hear you. You don't have to shout, bring it down, and then we can have a conversation. I'm over here when you want to talk to me. And staff got that. It took a while to establish that, because when I started, staff would come to me, so-and-so and so-and-so called me an F and this, that, and the other. And I'd have to say, so what would you want me to do with this? And they said, well, they have to send them home. I said, no, this is a PRU. So the culture shifted over time. And that is what I feel made a really special place to work in.
Mm. So is that that sounds like a good example of transactional analysis, right?
Analysis. Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
So
and when
so
and of course, where did I get transaction analysis from? Your boss, Toby. And
right.
I've used it. I taught my staff transaction analysis. We talked about PAC, etc. I'm okay, you're okay. And it took a while. Many staff left
Mm,
because they couldn't cope with having to reflect on yourself. Where am I? Parent, adult? Was I parent? Was I adult? Was I being a child in that moment? And that informed everything that we did.
yeah. I mean, certainly with COVID as well, like adding stresses and strains, there were being human as well. I suppose that there are times where I've overstepped and
Yeah.
responded angrily. I
Yeah.
suppose that that's bound to happen, but it must take it, great great reservoirs of patience and compassion. What are you looking for in a typical teacher who comes to join the staff and stays at your PRU?
It's a really interesting question, that, because one thing we didn't have was we did not have huge staff turnover. People stayed because they felt safe.
Oh, right.
And when we needed uh uh uh, temporary staff, what do you call it? Supply
Yeah.
staff. Yeah, we had staff who would only come and work with us because they were doing something else. Like we had a guy who was a comedian and
Right.
who was, he had that was his job. When we get the call, oh yeah, I'll come in, because it was safe. Because what we had was a sense of be human with these young people.
Mm,
They are children. They desperately want to be children. They want the freedom to be children. They want that sense that this place is secure enough for me to act as a child. So we had, like, if I give an example, break time would come, they're all playing basketball, but some would come, they're not coming up. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Go down. We had a revolving door. So go down and ask them once, twice, and then come back. Do not hang about waiting for them. So then send someone else down. Literally 30 seconds, that guy's up, you go. By the time it came to the third or fourth person, they were on the way up. No stress. So people understood that there was this approach taken. There was no expectation that you confront
mm,
children in that sort of manner where you're only going to escalate. We had a tiny little school. Some days we only had 15 kids in, some days we had 40 kids in. But the atmosphere was such that people felt, okay, this is safe. So, from what I'm looking for in staff was that understanding of don't try to beat down a child. Don't get into power plays with a child, because you will not win, and it will only escalate, and then someone else has to come along and deal with it. And I had one member of staff who never ever got it. And he was the only member of staff who used to get grief and then come to me, and I would say, well, I'm finding it difficult to protect you. And that may sound really harsh, but I said, I've watched you nag them. I've watched you lecture them. I've watched you, shout at them. I said, we don't do that here.
mm.
It was the counterintuitive approach that staff really enjoy. Now, look, this is my perspective on my school and my experiences. I'm not saying everybody saw it that way, but it was a safe place to be, is what I'm saying, really.
Yeah. Super. The um the class numbers you talk about are nice and low. So, can you just tell me again what's your typical population and what would the class size be? Like, I'm an English teacher. What would an English class look like?
at the time, I know it's increased now. Class size would be between about six, 7. And I believe it's increased now because of cutbacks, etc., and the need to, that funding has not kept up, shall we say, with the increasing exclusion population. So the idea really was, getting pupils in, and we had to draw them in without forcing them in. The idea of young person doing English in these circumstances, you had to convince them there was a point to this. And I had really good, highly inspirational staff who did that, could do that. And I remember an example where we got into trouble with Ofsted. Ofsted were there, they arrived. I was joining the member of the Ofsted staff, the Ofsted inspector, in observing a lesson. And there was a bit of a hullabaloo in the corridor. And the next thing, a pupil came in late, a little bit huffy, a little bit, which happened because we're dealing with often very challenging young people. But the member of staff, managed the situation, the arrival of this young person, almost seamlessly. Sat down, she went over in a very quiet, calm manner, explained quickly what we were doing, just take your time, settle down, and crack on. And yeah, it took a while, 5 minutes maybe for the child to obviously let the steam out and calm down, and then cracked on with the lesson. I was so proud of my member staff of that, and the pupil. But the Ofsted inspector didn't get it. Just said, yeah, but that pupil's late. I just said, yeah, it's a PRU.
Yeah, you know where you
we
are.
don't encourage lateness, but we are dealing with a situation which required skill. It was managed skillfully in the corridor because I could hear it. It was managed skillfully as the pupil arrived in the classroom because I could see it. But the Ofsted inspector saw something completely different, and I thought, well, we were in trouble there. But and there was a bit of a convincing job to convince them that, no, we pick our battles here. We choose what we're going to deal with. One of the things that we were picked up on was swearing in the corridor. And I thought, oh my God, do you know the challenges that these young people face? We're not dealing with swearing this week. There are times where we're focused on swearing, not in a confrontation manner, but saying, no, we don't accept that here, etc. The language we use, a lot of TA, transaction analysis used, always be adult. You cannot, and what being an adult in the adult TA mode, you have to be, there's just no emotion in it. You have to be, safe, non-threatening, and state clearly what it is you need to happen. And that's what staff did. And of course, once the kids got to know the staff, we could kick into child mode. We spent a lot of time in child mode. I remember one time it was snowing, and the kids were playing in the playground. And I don't know what I was doing, but I just went out to the door and I said, "Right, come on, the lot of you." And it's like they all stopped dead and just thought, seriously? And I was absolutely battered by snowballs. But this was just healthy banter.
Yeah, I
I never
remember.
forget. That
I
was
remember a Christmas over at Greenwich Park. My school was in Deptford, and there was an
yeah,
atmosphere
no,
of
yeah,
ecstasy. Everyone was out in the park, and I suppose many of your
yeah.
students coming in from Heathrow Airport may not have seen snow before as well. So, what that would have been a joyous moment, I can well imagine.
I think let's be clear. Most of them were born. They were born and raised in London. Like, you know what I mean.
I
So
see. Oh,
the
okay,
issue,
okay.
a lot of them, like, they might be first generation. A lot of Moroccan Algerian pupils as well. But the issue for me was that then that they just were having a great time. I did not want to disrupt it because they were playing.
Yeah.
When, and this is something people miss. When you have young people who are be extremely challenging backgrounds, they are safe enough to play safely with everybody. Nobody was sticking stones or anything in those snowballs. They were just playing. And I just wanted them to play, for as long as they wanted, because that's when you got them that sense of joy that they were feeling, allowed to feel joy. And then to come up like, yeah, the place was a mess with snow trudged everywhere.
Yeah.
But that
The
was not
impact
important at the moment.
upon relationships.
Absolutely. But it's like what you're doing. It's the whole idea of the complete human being. Let them be children. These are not pseudo adults who often, by the way, because of gang-related activity in the area, were operating in an adult world, in an adult sense. They were having to negotiate, postcode areas. Some of them were involved in dealing drugs. So their lives were constantly, well, I won't say at risk, but it's certainly imperiled. But
Yeah.
so we had to take all of this into account, give them a safe space to be. And I think we did that.
Lovely. Before we move on, I must apologize there because I spoke to Toby yesterday about this. Now, what I've done is conflate, I think, the school he worked at in Acton, maybe with
Oh
you,
yeah, that's what I worked with, Toby.
and the PRU. So that was the reference
That's
to
it.
Heathrow there. But
You're
okay, well,
right.
that's a lovely moment though. Uh,
Yeah.
when you think of the current climate in the UK,
Yeah.
is you've talked about PRUs being on the periphery, and so what's your hope and feeling about how what looks like a new Labour government, but nothing's certain. Do you think anything might change? What were your recommendations for change based upon your years of experience and the doctoral thesis?
Here is my recommendations, and I'm not hopeful.
Mm.
And I am working with my tutors now because they don't want me to write a paper. And and you've got to reach a point, oh, I've just done that now, and now they want me to write a paper. I need to breathe a little bit. But one of the things I recommend is that PRUs take on a different remit, shall we say. And what I'm saying is this: exclusion happens. PRUs exist, and I want to change the what PRUs do in order to support young people who've been excluded. And I'm arguing is this: at the point of exclusion and referral to a PRU, the next mainstream school is identified and agreed,
Mm.
regardless of what has gone on with this young person.
Mm.
The role of the PRU then is much more different than it is at the moment.
Mm.
And it becomes one of advocacy.
Yeah.
And the member of staff at the PRU advocates on behalf of not just the child, but the family, helping them to navigate what is a complex, confusing, and in some ways, I'm trying to find a lesser word than corrupt, because it's not corrupt, but there are elements of where parents think they're agreeing to something and they're not. It's not. It's something different.
Mm.
And I would want then that the PRU works with the young person on the issues that have led to his or her exclusion or their exclusion, and then working with the family, create and the new school while they're staying for maybe a term, 2 terms maximum in the PRU. So there's a clear goal.
Yes.
There is a clear goal, but also, and I think this is the tricky bit, I would want the PRU staff to be trained in non-behaviorist approaches to managing behavior, full stop. And I want them to become experts in approaches which effectively don't necessarily depend upon punitive, going down what Paul Dix, I don't know if you're aware of Paul Dix called going down punishment road. Because once you have, at the moment, sorry, let me just be clear, at the moment, a person's excluded, they come to the PRU, we then work with the pupil, decide, oh, they're doing really well, but then we go scurrying around looking for a school. Can you? Oh, no. Can you? No. Can you? No. What all I'm saying is that from a local authority perspective, agree from the beginning, this is the school that you're to go to, work on this child to make sure they get there. And that they almost have a panel of local authority services, a panel assessing where they are. So you could have social services, family and children services. You could have very often youth offending team. That's, I don't know if you're aware of youth offending team. It's, you know, young people are at risk of going to prison. The youth offending works with them to help them avoid it. Okay. So getting a panel of people around to say, assess, is this child ready? But asking why not? Because what you don't want is for pupils to be staying in PRUs for the duration of their education. That is the huge problem for me. Now, that changes the nature of the work that PRUs do. I used to say to my staff, our job is to do ourselves out of a job. Yeah. Because we don't want them here. We need to keep fun. But we couldn't. We couldn't. And the reality was, you know, but the reality was it was just became too problematic. Now, the question then comes along, what of those pupils who just are not ready for a mainstream school? Well, my answer to that is, well, then there is something that needs to be looked at, and maybe a special school should be considered for this person, given their needs. Now, you can see this is pie in the sky at the moment. You mentioned whether a Labour government would come in and make things different. Certainly not in the short run. Yeah. But I would want to be arguing that the PRU needs to exist as a short term. And by the way, they were set up, the Elton Report, 1989, they were set up as short-term placements, nothing else. I see, right. So the PRUs are not designed to hold on to a young person until, you know, for the duration, for years, short-term placements. And it's accepted now that, oh, well, some people just can't go back to mainstream. Well, if they can't go back to mainstream, it's to do with how they are, any conditions they might have. Okay, let's see what special school provision might be. Because we just had a vast range of issues and challenges to deal with. And very often we were the ones who would identify special educational needs or disabilities with these young people, because we took the time to push and ask the awkward questions. Yes. But, you know, so just summarizing what I'm just saying there, for me, keep the PRUs, but look after them. clarify what they're for, because sorry, I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but
Please, no, please go on.
this is the key thing my research has shown. Time and time and time again, the question is posed, and I'm talking about going way back to since 1989. What is the role of PRUs? How do we assess progress in a PRU? And nobody's come up with an answer to that. Nobody. There's recommendations. What does success in a PRU mean? Well, success in a PRU means that we ship out as many young people as possible. They're ready for mainstream, and for, they cope in a mainstream school. But this requires a buy-in from the mainstream school to accept that young people may come with a range of challenges that they're not used to, but that they then need to say to themselves, okay, what do we need to do to make this young person? In my interview with the head of the PRU for my research, I asked him this question: how do you make sure schools are set up to manage a young person who comes from you? And he said this: it can no longer be a grilling. And he goes to some of the meetings with the head teacher, and it becomes a grilling. And it's a one-way conversation. The head teacher says, you're welcome at this school, but you have, 2 chances or 1 chance or 3 chances, and after that you're out. And he had said this because he had recently been at a meeting where he had got. So you get the young person into the mainstream school with a range of challenging behaviors.
Yeah.
That the child is then expected to knuckle down, and it's all going to be okay.
Set up to fail.
Set up to fail. And we often had that, by the way. We had that a lot. We get someone in, they come back. Just get someone in, they come back.
Well, Tony, thank you very much indeed. We've talked for a good long time, and I'm just thinking that maybe there might be some follow-up questions from people at school, because
no problem.
My next series of questions goes into ambiguous political futures and who knows what about local school funding and whatever. But can we conclude? And I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop this recording now, and I'll be sending it on to my peers back at ICHK. But I really appreciate that. You've done a fantastic job with the thesis, and mainly that career working to advocate for those young people is incredible. It's very inspiring. Thanks for your time, Tony.
No problem.